Hi, my name is Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Building. I'm really happy to be able to welcome you to the second day of Risk and Regulations Live for 2024 with this session that we're hosting this morning that I'm really excited about chairing. So this morning's topic is Unpacking Change, a deep dive into the construction industry scheme reform. And it's sure to be another great session. We've had two great sessions in Risk and Regs already this week, so really looking forward to cracking into this one. With the sector preparing for a shift in the tax regime that governs it thanks to the impending construction industry scheme or CIS reform, this webinar has been designed to gain valuable insights into the changes that will impact the landscape for contractors, subcontractors and other industry stakeholders alike. So to start things off, I'd love to introduce today's speakers. I'm delighted to be joined by both Isabel Byrne, Senior Policy Advisor at HMRC, and Jamie Eddy, Practice Solutions Lead at Xero for this morning's session. Before I hand over to the experts, I'd just like to quickly run through how today's session is set to work. To kick things off, both Isabel and Jamie will provide an overview presentation on different aspects of the topic before coming together for a mediated Q&A session with me in the latter part of the session. We want to answer as many of our audience's questions as possible, so please send through any that you have at any point and we'll try and cross off as many as possible. And I'd also like to flag that both our speaker slides are available in the resources section of your webcast display. Finally, I just want to flag that this session, like all our sessions, will be available on demand within an hour of the completion. So please feel free to revisit if there's anything you want to review or share with a colleague who you think will find it useful. That's probably enough from me in the first instance. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the experts. Isabel, if you could present first, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, that's fine. So if we start sharing the slides. Thanks, Jordan. So I'm Isabel Byrne. I am on the Construction Industry Scheme Policy team in HMRC, and I'll be talking to you today about Construction Industry Scheme reform from the 6th of April 2024. So if we can go to the next slide. So before I talk about the changes, I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail of the background of where the changes came from and what sort of led up to the consultation. So members of HMRC's Construction Forum raised areas that the scheme was causing administrative burdens, including a high volume of monthly nil returns for groups and the treatment of payments from landlord to tenants under the scheme, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail later. So just for information, the Construction Forum was set up between HMRC and industry representatives to discuss taxation issues affecting the construction sector. We have members including British Property Federation, Employment Tax Industry Forum, and the Chartered Institute of Taxation and other representative and professional bodies. So that's the landlord to tenant changes. And then on the other changes, so this sort of came from a compliance risk that had been identified around gross payment status, which we found had been used for fraudulent abuse of the scheme. So just for a bit of background of gross payment status. So a core feature of the scheme is that contractors have to make deductions on payments to subcontractors and pay this to HMRC as an advance payment towards a subcontractor's tax and national insurance. So if subcontractors pass the 3 tests, so this is turnover test, so it's currently set to 30,000, the business test, so that they're undertaking construction operations mainly conducted by a bank account, and the compliance test. So the compliance test looks at a number of compliance obligations in the 12 months before application. Then they can receive gross payment status and receive payments with no deductions from the contractor. Okay, so the changes to this are to strengthen the test for gross payment status due to this compliance risk that had been identified. Responses to previous consultations suggested that we did tighten the criteria for gross payment status to limit the abuse of the scheme. So we found that this supply chain fraud often involved CIS and VAT, and whilst we check compliance with direct taxes under the compliance test, previously we didn't check VAT compliance, nor did we have sort of the legislative ability to remove gross payment status for sort of serious VAT non-compliance or fraud. Okay, so if we can go on to the next slide. So this led up to the consultation. So at Tax Administration and Maintenance Day last year, so that was spring 23, we launched a 12-week consultation on proposals to strengthen the tests for gross payment status, proposals to ease administrative burdens of the scheme, including a grouping arrangement and removing payments from landlord to tenants from the scope of the scheme. We held 4 roundtable meetings and received 45 written responses, mainly from companies, professional bodies, and legal and accountancy firms. And then at Autumn Statement 2023, we published the summary responses to the consultation, announcing the legislative and non-legislative changes to the scheme, all coming into effect from the 6th of April 2024. So if we can go to the next slide. So this shows all of the changes from April. I'll start off with the landlord to tenant. So where conditions are met, and I'll go into the conditions later, most payments from landlord to tenants will be outside the scope of the SIS. So to provide a bit more detail, payments made from landlord to tenants for changes to premises that they occupy or intend to occupy. Commercial landlords, who are often deemed contractors, will make the payments to the tenants, who will then commission the works. So previously, before the changes, only where these payments were reverse premiums, so where they were an inducement to enter a lease, they were outside the scope of the scheme, which meant that other payments, which were not reverse premiums made from landlord to tenant, were within the scope of the scheme. Therefore, the landlord would have to apply the scheme's deduction on those payments. So this caused administrative and financial burdens of the deduction to the landlords and the tenants. And it brought tenants within the scope of the scheme who would otherwise be outside the construction industry scheme. So I'll go into the conditions in a minute. So just to go on to gross payment status. So the first change, so VAT will be added to the gross payment status compliance test. And in line with other taxes, and I'll go into detail on these tolerances in a minute, we'll have allowances for minor compliance failures. So a certain number of late filing and late payment we will overlook for the purposes of the compliance test. The first review of compliance history will be brought forwards from 12 months after application to 6 months before reverting to 12 months. So this means that when you apply for gross payment status, we will apply the compliance test, which will look at the previous 12 months. Then 6 months after application, your compliance history will be reviewed again, and then it will revert to this annual review. Just to be clear on this one as well, so when we add VAT to the gross payment status compliance test, those that hold gross payment status at the 6th of April, we won't be looking at VAT compliance before the 6th of April. And then on to the final change. So the grounds on which HMRC can immediately remove gross payment status will expand to include fraud, including income tax, corporation tax, pay-as-you-earn, and VAT. So currently, HMRC can immediately remove gross payment status where there are reasonable grounds to expect that an entity has fraudulently provided an incorrect return or incorrect information. So this is currently linked to fraudulently providing SIS returns and information in line with SIS obligations. So as we know that supply chain fraud cuts across a number of taxes, this has been expanded to include the taxes that I just listed. So it will be fraudulent returns in relation to those taxes and fraudulently provided incorrect information. And finally, on digitalisation. So from the 6th of April 2024, an electronic form will be available for subcontractor registrations and gross payment status applications. Telephone applications will no longer be available apart from for those who are digitally excluded. So the form has sort of undergone user testing and it's had some really positive feedback. It has features like it'll allow you to save and come back to the application. So the digital form will be available for non-resident companies, but at this time it won't be available to non-resident sole traders and partnerships who will continue to use the print and post option. So while telephone applications will no longer be available, we'll have the new electronic form, and print and post option will also continue to be available. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the tolerances set out in regulations. So HMRC will overlook the following failures in the qualifying period. So 3 late submissions of VAT returns up to 28 days late, any late payment of VAT where the amount is under £100, 3 late payments of VAT liability of £100 or more up to 14 days late. So existing appeal rights will apply as they currently are under the compliance test, and gross payment status will not be removed if there's reasonable excuse for any of these compliance failures. And as I've mentioned, those who hold gross payment status at the 6th of April 2024, VAT compliance before then will not be taken into account for the purposes of the compliance test. So that's just VAT compliance. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so this is the sets out the legislation on the payments from landlord to tenants. So where the payments are made under a construction contract from a landlord to tenant and the payments made after the 6th of April, they will be outside the scope of the SIS where the payment is made by or on behalf of the landlord. The person receiving the payment is a tenant or prospective tenant of the landlord. The payment is for construction operations agreed in connection with a lease or an enforceable agreement to enter a lease. The tenant that occupies or will occupy the property will carry out the construction operations itself, or a third person is contracted to carry out the construction operations. And so this is key. So the payment is for construction work intended primarily for the benefit and use of the tenant that occupies or will occupy the property under the lease. The new rules will supplement existing rules, so as I mentioned before, that exempted those payments which were reverse premiums. So that legislation will remain in place as an exemption as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so for both of the areas of change that I've just set out, the changes will be in this month's agent update, which I believe is due to be published today, and the employer bulletin, and then guidance on both the changes from the 6th of April will be published in the Construction Industry Scheme available on gov.uk. So for the gross payment status changes, this will set out sort of what we will and won't overlook that can be found in the guidance. And for the landlord to tenant, there'll be some more guidance on those changes as well, including sort of examples of what will and won't be in the scope of the scheme under the new changes. Next slide, please. So finally, just on simplification, at consultation, we invited suggestions on how the scheme can be simplified and or digitalised further. We did receive a lot of suggestions on this that we're sort of working our way through. We sort of distilled them down to key areas, what we identified. Lots was raised about the scope of the SIS, so what was within the scope of the SIS and what the SIS applies to, so including electric charging points and modern methods of construction. Lots was also raised about SIS processes, so old and new processes that could be simplified, some of these through digitalisation. And then there were a number of other more specific issues which we identified, brought up, such as deemed contractor rules, nil returns, and registration. So on simplification, we hope that the new digital form that I explained will improve registration. We've produced guidance on modern methods of construction, which is due to be published shortly. And internal changes mean that sort of one team in HMRC now have responsibility for all SIS issues. So we hope that this will sort of address some of the delays and SIS queries duplication that was raised. And then also over over the coming months, so CIS policy alongside internal stakeholders are continuing to review the suggestions put forward by the consultation, and we sort of made a commitment to the construction forum that we would set out our plans for simplification from the consultation in the next meeting. So that's all from me. I don't know if we want
Brilliant.
Have any questions? I can't see the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Isabel. That was such a great way to start things off and had such an insightful overview of what those changes are going to be. There was one question that I just wanted to pop to you while I've got the chance right now, if that's okay. Just around sort of, obviously that was like a lot of ground to cover. So for our audience, what do you sort of think are the biggest compliance requirement changes that they need to have at the forefront of their mind when looking to make sure that they're not breaching any of those new regulations?
So I think it would depend sort of what sector that what subsector they're in. So if they have gross payment status, I guess just to be aware that of the changes, and that VAT compliance will be looked at now in the same way that previously we were sort of regularly checking compliance with direct taxes. As I said, sort of the allowances and the tolerances will be published in our guidance. So I think to have an understanding of what they are, but I guess it's quite similar to what you already sort of have to comply with in terms of direct taxes to keep gross payment status. So if your compliance is the same across VAT, then you should continue to hold gross payment status in the same way. I guess also for landlord to tenant, if they're sort of in that subsector, so commercial landlords and deemed contractors, again, there'll be more guidance in the construction industry scheme manual on sort of examples of what will be outside the scope of the scheme under the new rules.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was such a great way to kick things off. To our audience, please do send through those questions. We'll try and get as many of them answered after the next presentation as well. So next, I would like to invite Jamie, if you wouldn't mind sharing your presentation from a different angle on the topic. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much for having me, everybody, this morning, which it still is. So yeah, my name's Jamie. I'm from Xero. Our platform, if you don't know what it is a platform designed to help small businesses with their records, and also, most importantly, I guess in this subject, is stay compliant. So within our bookkeeping account solution, we've got the ability for you to deal with all of your CIS requirements, whether you're a contractor or a subcontractor. You can activate all of those within the settings, and what Xero does is then create the relevant chart of accounts for you to be able to then automate those CIS calculations, and you'll get the specific labor and materials codes that you can then use and be able to generate those invoices either on a desktop or on your laptop, or also on your mobile if you're out and about creating quotes and anything along those kind of lines. You'll be able to process all of those automated CIS calculations correctly for you, as well as then any that you might be receiving the other way. You can also then file your monthly CIS returns from within Xero as well, and those returns can be filed from Xero straight to HMRC. You will have the CIS add-on, which is allows you to do that from within Xero, but you can also submit through HMRC's portal by exporting the data out of Xero if you don't want to pay for that additional add-on. And what the add-on also gives you is the ability to verify subcontractor rates. So if with some of these changes, if anybody that you previously dealt with might lose gross payment status, then you can check what their existing rate might be, whether that's gone up to standard or higher, and that can also be done from within Xero using the UTR number. You can then check that, and that's all included as part of the CIS add-on. It also gives you a link out to HMRC site directly, so if you don't want to pay for the add-on, you can still do it through HMRC's site, but this obviously gives you the convenience of doing it from within Xero and having that all aligned to the contact record. What you can also do is send out all of the relevant statements, so any deductions that and payments that you might have made or been deducted. You can also do these as one by one if you are just using Xero as standard. If you want to get the CIS add-on that I've already mentioned, you can actually then bulk send all of these out, so you can do them in a lot less clicks and reduce a lot of that admin burden with the CIS add-on. But I guess what the important change from this new reform will convey across to the VAT compliance. So you'll be able to calculate your VAT alongside your CIS from within Xero, and it works with all of the relevant schemes that you might be on, whether that's accrual, flat rate scheme, cash VAT schemes. You can review all of your VAT returns online, and then you've got a nice easy portal to submit through to HMRC with Making Tax Digital, as well as then seeing the dates that you've submitted, getting receipts and stamps for all of those, and also be able to see how much you due and what you've paid. So it will help give you a great overview of your VAT position to ensure that you're staying compliant, which is obviously relevant for anybody that's holding. I mean, it's relevant for everybody, but if you don't want to lose your gross payment status, you'll be able to file those returns online really quick and easy through the Xero solution. It will go through, calculate everything you need, do all of your review process, or work with your accountant if you've got an accountant that you're working with, and they'll be able to access all of that data as well. I'll be able to do all of the processing and filing through to HMRC. Any VAT reclaims or anything else that you have going on, you'll be able to produce all of that. And then most importantly, make sure that you are reducing any risk of errors. Obviously, HMRC have just gone through their allowances and any leeway that they'll be giving people, but this will just make sure that you are a bit more watertight around the information that you're submitting and ensuring that everything else is correct. And obviously, one of the really relevant things as well was a change from a couple of years ago in terms of the reverse charge VAT. So in using Xero, you can ensure you've got the correct wording on all of those invoices that might apply, as well as the correct VAT treatment within any of your reports. So yeah, Xero is really set up to help you take away a lot of the administrative burden from your CIS compliance, VAT compliance, and making sure that everything is all present and correct. So that is all from me on a brief run through of the relevant points within Xero that will help you stay compliant and ensure that everything is above board for the compliance alongside the new CIS reform.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jamie. That was another really interesting overview. Cool. Isabel, if you could just unmute yourself as well so that we can just have a bit of a group Q&A. The first question, and it's probably one for you in the first instance, Isabel, is sort of, I just wanted to pick up, you were talking about the consultation, how you were looking at that simplification process, and we're going to report back at the next forum meeting on sort of what your plans are around that. What sort of timescales would that see, like in terms of when would the market be expecting to see any further changes?
I think it would depend on sort of what the changes are. So as I said, there's a lot of things that were in there about scope and about digital sort of processes that could be digitalized. I think obviously the CIS has a system that is very old. So I think in terms of like completely redoing the CIS system probably wouldn't be something that we do soon. But I guess it's those sort of looking at those sort of changes that we can make, processes that can be sort of digitalized in sort of an acceptable time period that we'll be looking at. So I think, as I say, so the next construction forum meeting is June. So we've committed in June to sort of set out our plans then in terms of timescales and the simplification. So yeah, I think it sort of depends on which areas we've identified and what the simplification is. So whether it is guidance updates or whether it is sort of a process changing or a process being digitalized.
One of the other things that I wanted to just double check was, is it still the same fact that if you are, if you have your gross payment status cancelled, do you still need to wait 12 months to reapply, even with the new reforms, or is there any change to that?
No, there's no change to that. So that will work in the same way. Yeah. So if it is removed, then it's the 12 months until you can reapply.
Brilliant. One for you, Jamie, sort of along the lines of, one of the topics we were talking about is, this digital integration, how we can simplify things. What do you see as being, some of the key things that people can do on a digital platform to make sure that they are complying properly?
With any of the digital platforms using Xero, and obviously the ability to file through to HMRC, I think like just being able to have access to any of that wherever you are is the key thing for staying compliant. Like if I'm generating invoices or allocating any of the bills that I get coming in as they're arriving and not stacking them all up to do at the end of a VAT quarter, then you're less likely to go ahead and miss things. Like it's very easy for me if I take my own example for any tax returns that I've done before when I've worked at accountancy practices, and you just get a big box of receipts or whatever it might be at the end of a quarter or at the end of a tax year. It's very easy to miss things and not stay on top of them. But with Xero and our own app, which is HubDoc, you can take photo of all of your receipts. They can then feed straight into Xero. You can process quotes and invoicing on your mobile app. So even if you're out and about, it's very easy to stay on top of all of the admin, and you don't let it stack up to then eventually miss things or become non-compliant because you haven't stayed on top of it. And you can also very easily access all of that information on your desktop or on your laptop, whatever it might be, to get your filing in to make sure that you are filing well within the time and not running the risk of any kind of late payments and losing any kind of status because the admin's just got too much.
Brilliant. So sort of to both of you, so if either wants to jump in first, I'm not going to deliberately pick on anybody, but do you see the reform having any significant impact on the day-to-day operations of either contractors or subcontractors or landlords or tenants sort of within the sector, and if so, how will that impact be felt?
I'll have to jump in first. I think, as Isabel mentioned, as long as you're already staying compliant, then there shouldn't be a massive change from the reform. I think we can probably all vouch for, like, we don't want anybody taking the mix. So, like, if there are a load, the idea of this reform is to weed out a lot of the fraud that's been going on between VAT non-compliance and also making use of that gross payment status. So, as long as you're just staying up to date with the relevant VAT refiling and you were already compliant from a direct tax perspective to have even got gross payment status to start with, then there shouldn't be any change to that. The idea of it being that we're aiming to remove a lot of that fraudulent activity that is occurring in space at the minute. So it's just staying on top of the VAT return filing pretty much, because that's obviously quarterly, so it's a lot easier to let that slip than it is your direct tax, which is once a year.
Brilliant.
So I could come in on that as well. I would sort of agree that I guess in terms of administratively, in terms of the gross payment status reform, there's nothing sort of extra that we're asking you to do. We're quite conscious of sort of administrative burdens and things like that. So that's something that we were keen not to have if we changed the test. So as long as you're sort of keeping up with your VAT compliance obligations in the same way that you already are expected to do with your direct tax obligations, if you have gross payment status, that's what we would expect. And again, with the landlord to tenant, in terms of day-to-day activities, I don't think this should sort of create an administrative burden. As long as you sort of understand the legislation, and as I said, we'll have sort of guidance updates of what will now be outside of the scheme.
So just on that point, you were talking about the guidance updates, and you were obviously talking about the update that's coming out today, you were saying, and then also the CIS manual that you mentioned. Are there any other useful resources that people should be looking at in this sort of arena to make sure that they're up to date with everything? Obviously, they can listen back to this session and share it with their colleagues. But is there other things that you'd like to see people, tapping into to, make sure they've got the latest information?
So again, sort of the things that we're providing, Jamie sort of might have and other things to add on this, but what we're providing, as I said, is we've got the agent update, employer bulletin, and it is sort of the new legislation and the guidance will be published on gov.uk in the Construction Industry Scheme Reform Manual. So,
brilliant.
And from a Xero perspective, there's not, I guess, too much from the reform change in terms of the way that CIS is processed within our system. It'll just be if anybody's status changes or whatever, which you can do from the verification portal in Xero. But yeah, we try and work closely with HMRC on things going forward, like making tax digital that's on the horizon and things like that. So yeah, just staying abreast of most of our blogs on our website will give a Xero perspective on some changes that will be happening.
Brilliant. So obviously, in general, there are ramifications if you fail to sort of comply with these sorts of things. What are the ramifications if people are failing to meet the requirements under the new regulations?
Yeah, so I guess the thing is with this, it's the compliance test. So we apply this on application, and then, as I said, it will be 6 months after, and then 12 months after that. So if you fail the compliance test, you will sort of be informed of those failures. The appeal rights are the same as they currently are under the compliance test. So if it's a compliance failure, there's a chance for someone to sort of say if there's a reasonable excuse for that. But obviously, if it goes beyond what the tolerances are and there's no reasonable excuse, then it would be a case of removing gross payment status.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. I think we might sort of start to wrap it up there. But before I do, unless there's any more audience questions, I've powered through a number of them there. I've just sort of been running through them. I would just ask if each of you wouldn't mind just sort of giving 1 or 2 or 3, however many you think is particularly pertinent, key points that you'd like to leave the audience with at top of mind, just to make sure that everyone's on the same, got the key takeaways that you want them leaving with at the top of their head.
Yeah, so happy to go first. So obviously gross payment status from the 6th of April. We'll be checking VAT compliance in the same way that we currently do for direct tax compliance. Sort of the appeal rights are the same for this as they currently are under the compliance test. Things like reasonable excuse are taken into consideration in the same way. We are setting out those tolerances in regulations to allow for those minor sort of compliance failures. And again, guidance will be published in the Construction Industry Scheme Reform Manual. And then again, on landlord to tenant payments, those conditions, so if the payment is made after the 6th of April 2024 and all the conditions are met, then it will no longer be in the scope of the scheme, so that a deduction will not have to be applied to it. And again, guidance on that and sort of examples of what wouldn't qualify under the new legislation will be published ahead of the changes.
Amazing, thank you.
I think for me, we're obviously coming at this from a compliance point of view, and I would encourage as many people to make sure that you are on a platform that enables you to do that in the most efficient way possible, whether that's Xero or another cloud solution. The access to data and the ability to process anything on the go, and it's very easy to stay on top of all of that kind of stuff, which enables you to stay compliant and not fall foul of any of these changes. But even more than that, it just gives you more power and oversight of data within your business and allow you to make better business decisions going forward, so that you aren't unsure of where you might be sitting. You can see everything that's incoming, outgoing, what cash flow looks like going forward, VAT payments and all that kind of stuff layer into it. So it just gives you more power to work with the numbers within your business and plan for things in the future as well.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. So I'd like to start by saying a huge thank you to both Isabel and Jamie for your time and expertise, both today and in the lead up to the session. We really appreciate your contributions, as we do with all our speakers. It's such a it's so important to the programs that we can put on. Also, a big thank you to our audience. We really value your input and your attendance. I'd love to ask all those who've attended to fill in a brief survey. It'll come up at the very end of this session, just to let us know what you thought, and so that we can design more events on the topics that you want to hear about the most. I'd also just like to flag there are 2 more risk and regulations live sessions today, one at 2 p.m. on the national the MPPF reform, and another at 3:30 p.m. on the latest on Part L regulations. So all today's sessions, as well as the 2 building safety webinars that took place yesterday, are free to attend, available on demand, and are CPD accredited. So please take a look at any you find relevant, share with a colleague who you think will enjoy it, and all the slides are available as well. That's about it from me. Thanks again to Isabel and Jamie, and goodbye.